Well, good morning and welcome to Thompson Hine's Coffee Chat series. My name is Cassandra Borchers and I am a partner in our Cincinnati office in investment management. Joining me today, I have three wonderful women who are going to talk about their experiences interviewing and getting onto boards. First, we have Michelle Rackey, MBA, an independent trustee for Advisors Series Trust, chair of the Nominating and Governance Committee, an advisor, CEO, COO, qualified financial expert with expertise in revenue growth, governance, and transformation within mutual funds, insurance, financial services, and wealth management industries. Michelle is having a few technical difficulties at the moment, but we hope to have her on the screen here shortly. And welcome, Michelle. Next, we have Peg McLaughlin, who is an independent director for State Street Global Advisors Mutual Funds and governing council member for the Independent Directors Council. And welcome, Peg. Finally, Dina Tantra, an independent board director and chairman of the Heartland Funds, independent trustee, chair of the nominating and governance committees for Boston Trust Walden Funds and Thornburg Income Builder Opportunities Trust. Welcome, Dina. I am delighted that these three have agreed to lend their expertise to this discussion. And once again, excited and humbled to be speaking with three such accomplished women. So today we have part 2 in our 3-part series on fund board service. This one is designing your strategic plan for getting on a registered fund. You were part of our first series. This one's going to be a little bit different. This one is a little bit longer. We have 1 hour scheduled, and we are expecting to have this be an interactive discussion. So if you have questions or comments, we encourage you to join the discussion by using the chat box on your control panel. We would like this to be interactive throughout the presentation, and we will also leave time at the end for questions. We will do our best to address all of those comments and questions, and anything that we don't get through during our time together, we will certainly follow up on. There we are. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
I'm sorry you had such difficulty.
Oh my God. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the tech help, but I'm on my phone, so it's not optimal, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Yes, I'm glad you could join us. So we do have a lot of ground to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. The first recommendation we have, as the title of this coffee chat suggests, is that you need a plan, a roadmap for achieving the goal of sitting on a mutual fund board. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Dina, in our discussions, you have outlined a 6-step plan for getting on an interview for a board position. And I think it would be beneficial for us to set the stage. If you wouldn't mind covering that list.
I can do that. Thanks, Cassandra, and welcome to all our participants. I think we've got a nice blend of people still in the industry, most likely fund management, thinking about their next steps. And then I know we have a number of people who have already made that leap and are working on their plan. So I think the timing is great. I also think it's wonderful. By popular demand, we've moved to 60 minutes because I know the 4 of us have a lot to say, and even 60 minutes won't be enough, but I will at least walk us through. We tried to pare it down, if you will, to 6 topics, and we'll try and move through them as efficiently as possible. And really our focus here, Peg and Michelle and I have been on this journey, is to give practical advice, to share our lessons learned, and really to make this useful for the participants as they're building their own strategy. And everything has to be customized and tailored to you and your own experiences. But if we can share sort of our battle wounds, then maybe you can learn from those. So hitting off, we have 6 topics. Letting people know you're interested in a board position. And I think this is particularly for people in fund management who are not yet retired. Start weaving in those conversations. So that's the first one. Casting a wide net. You never know where the opportunity is going to come from. And you have to think about networking a little bit differently than kind of in your regular corporate jobs. Differentiating yourself, sitting as a NomGov chair, and I know Michelle's in the same position, lots of resumes come in, and you've got to be memorable. You've got to be able to differentiate yourself. And then coupled with that is staying top of mind. You are going to meet a lot of people on this journey, and they're going to meet you, and you want to be one of the top 3 people that they think of when that opportunity comes across their desk. Number 5 is establishing yourself as the perfect fit. I think this is going to be an interesting part of the conversation. And then finally, what everyone on this call is interested in is the magic bullet, finding the opportunities, right? You can be as best prepared. And I know in April, we're also going to talk about the interview process. But how do you even know where the opportunities are? It's not posted. It's not on Craigslist. It's sort of getting through steps 1 through 5, and then hoping that at some point, the paths will collide. So that's where we're going to head out. And so, Cassandra, do you want me to go ahead and start with letting people know?
Sure, that would be fantastic.
Okay. So as I said, and this is really for, particularly people who are in fund management, how do you let people know that you're interested in a board position, especially when it feels awkward? You're currently in one job, you're talking about your aspirations in a couple of years, maybe 5 years, maybe even 10 years down the road. How do you develop your elevator pitch? How do you talk about yourself in this new journey? Michelle and Peg, do you guys, either of you, Michelle, you're nodding your head. You want to start off?
Sure. And welcome, everyone. Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for Thompson Hine for doing this as well. I didn't start early enough. So as Dina said, in a perfect world, for those of you who are still working, and this is a thought in the back of your mind, I agree with Dina, the starting early is really key. Many of us also, I'll just say for myself, I didn't keep my LinkedIn updated. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I didn't think that was important. And then when I said, oh, I think I'd be great on a mutual fund board, and other people said that to me too, suddenly all these things were really important. So I agree with Dina. For those of you who are currently searching, the LinkedIn, I think really is important, and keep maintaining those contacts as well. So that starting as early as you can. And I think really just saying, as my next chapter in my life, this is what I'm thinking about. And people may give you advice, they keep you in mind, whatever it is, but that's starting early. And Peg, what about you?
I think we'll talk about this more as we go along in some of the other sections. But I agree with you, Michelle, because I didn't do it, and I never networked. I had 3 kids in 20 months when I was working, and I worked, and I came home, and that was it. And I would highly recommend not doing it that way, or waiting until you decide that you want to take a different path in your life to do that. So the importance of networking can't be overstated, either at the time that you decide this is what you want to do, or as you said, Michelle and Dina, both of you, doing that ahead of time. I mean, having that thought of 5 or even 10 years ahead, what's my next move? I guess that's true of anything, not just a board position, but just talking to people. And I think, Dina, you mentioned, letting everybody know that you're interested, and I think that's you never know where these things are going to come. And I know that's I won't get into that. That's the next step that we're talking about, but you really never know where opportunities can lie. And I'll share something later, but I think that's a real important.
I think that's right. And I actually remember having a conversation where somebody said, oh, I never knew that's what you wanted. I never thought of you in that light. So unless you bring it up, people may not be connecting the dots. They may see you as hard charging chief compliance officer. They may see you as, a president, chief marketing officer, whatever the case may be. But until you actually sort of plant that seed, for them, they need the help connecting the dots. So getting comfortable with your elevator pitch, getting comfortable with creating a board bio, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But also when you're at conferences and you think about the ICI conferences coming up in March, all of you are busy and you're traveling and so forth. Now's the time to start planting the seed of, I love to talk to you about corporate right now. I'd also like to pick your brain a little bit about my next step. Not that I'm going anywhere right now, but what tools, what experiences, what network can I establish in these last phases of my career so that I can smoothly transition. So, and for those of you who are already transitioning, don't panic.
Right.
You can't start too early, but you can catch up. So I see there's a note about this ICI conference, and just a side note, Investment Company Institute is particularly a mutual fund industry group. And Peg, since you're involved, maybe you'd like to say a couple words about
so
that.
the Investment Company Institute is I believe, largest trade organization that represents financial services companies, in particular, or mostly the mutual fund industry. A subset of that organization is the Independent Directors Council, which I'm on the governing council of, and that represents specifically mutual fund directors. And I know, again, we're going to be talking about this. I don't want to get too far ahead, but there are conferences that are sponsored by both the Investment Company Institute and the Independent Directors Council. The upcoming one in Palm Desert in March is, it used to be called the Legal and Compliance. I think it's something different now. I think they've rebranded it, but it's a really large conference of leaders in all aspects of mutual fund, both operations and legal and compliance, and quite a few directors go as well. And it's I've always found it to be a very helpful conference. When I was in the industry in mutual funds, I thought it was great. And I found it in the last few years that I've gone as a director to be great in terms of content. I think with what Dina is saying, I would add to that in terms of, going to these conferences and talking to people. And you can do it in an informational way, where you're asking people what their experiences with boards have been, and if your background would be something that they think, based on their experiences, because a lot of the people, even if they're not on boards, are having interface with the mutual fund boards, are presenting in front of them. So they see, the types of people, the types of experiences that the boards have, and perhaps something that they're lacking that maybe you have that you want to highlight later on. And I think, again, we can talk about this later, but I think actually, to the extent that you can be comfortable, reaching out to the board members themselves of the complexes that you are involved in, and asking for their experiences, previous to the board, but also just getting on a board. I think that would be helpful.
I think this is a perfect segue, Cassandra, if you don't mind. We're talking about casting a wide net. Item 2, for those of you following at home, and it's exactly what Peg is talking about. Networking, while some of you may tolerate it and some of you may hate it, now is the time to reframe your thoughts about networking and think of it as relationship building or relationship strengthening or deepening, however you want to call it. Networking, unfortunately, today is the primary way to get a hold of the opportunities and to make your way into the interview circle. Michelle and Peg, do you agree?
Yes. I mean, as we said, Dina said this, these jobs are not posted anywhere, really, generally. And so it really is talking to everybody. And I think that wide net, I included compliance people. I know everyone says the accountants, the lawyers, but I did compliance people as well, because they are the support network. And again, it's this who knows who is really the question. And my lead for my position through 4 people, started with a compliance person, by the way. And don't be afraid to network with people outside of mutual funds. So as an example, I also belong to the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD, and I would network with those folks and then tell them, here's where I think I'd be a perfect fit. And then, yeah, I could do other industries. And then people there would say, well, I know someone who's on a mutual fund board. So don't be afraid to create that network. And I'm going to make a very specific suggestion here that says keep a spreadsheet of your network. So when you first start, I have a physical Rolodex. However, your the contact
Old
list is.
school, Michelle, you're old school.
I have both. I have it all, Dina. But you go through, who do you know? However that is for you, that you keep track of those people. Doesn't matter how you do it. But then create your spreadsheet. And I put tabs in my spreadsheet. These are mutual fund people. Maybe you have a tab for the support folks, the attorneys, the accountants, the compliance people, recruiters, are there recruiters? And there are recruiters you should chat with. And then other folks as well. So, and be very meticulous about that. How did you get to that person? When did you talk with them? How did that go?
I
Granted,
included, Michelle,
yeah.
dates also.
Oh,
Last
yeah.
time I contacted that person.
Absolutely.
Did
Yeah.
I send my resume? Which version?
Yeah, which version. But I think that's important too, to say, if you talked with that person, and truly you can always go into your own email to see, we talked on this date. And also if you sent them a thank you note via email, that'll be in your email as well. So all of that is logged there. And Peg, did you do a spreadsheet as well?
You guys are way more organized than I am. No, I did not. I had 2. I'm a writer. I'm not a typer. I like to write things. I keep things in mind when I physically write them. So everybody, I think what the key here is to recognize that everybody has their own way of doing things, and you can only be yourself. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're talking to people. What I did was I ended up, I think, with 2 really large books where I would write out every conversation I had. I kept a tickler of people I wanted to talk to. But again, I want to stress, because I think both Michelle and Dina were far ahead of me in the game in terms of networking, because I did not network before I decided that this was the path I wanted to take. And I mean, I did not network at all. And so what I did was I had spent about a dozen years at Harris Associates, which is the advisor to the Oakmark funds. But then I pivoted, and I spent about 8 or 9 years at a couple startup fund for CLO manager. And then also we had a technology company. So sort of completely out of the mutual fund industry. And I started with a couple people that the president of the Oakmark funds and the board director. And from there, I kept asking people. I asked them to introduce me to people, and I kept asking the people that they introduced me to, down the line. But I think I would just make 2 points with that. One, I never asked anybody about an opportunity. I always approached networking from a stance of curiosity, a stance of experiences. Could you explain to me your experience getting onto a board? What you think important? Does my background align with what boards need? So I never said, do you know of something? Because I think when you approach it a little less directly, and directly isn't the right word, but not as high pressure or making it known right away, like, tell me what you know. I think people are more apt to spend time with you. The second point I would make is, because in fact, I just had this conversation with a candidate this past week. Because I didn't network, I think what helped me when I tried to get back in touch with people in the mutual fund industry was that when I was working, I was an engaged coworker. I'm an extrovert by nature, and so I'm the annoying person in line at the grocery store that'll ask you about whatever you've got in your cart. But I genuinely like to get to know people and get to know my coworkers and people I dealt with on a regular basis, and service providers and all of that. So I think when I went back, and literally 10 sometimes 15 years where I hadn't talked to somebody but got reconnected, they were willing to talk. So I think it's important as you're laying the groundwork to just, be a nice person that's interested in what people are doing, not just from a professional standpoint, but making that connection. Again, Dina, and
Yeah.
Michelle both made that, making that it's a relationship building.
Let me jump in here because I know a number of the participants know Peg personally. They're big fans, and I will say Peg is a rock star at networking. She may have come to the table later in her career, but every person I meet will say, "Oh, do you know Peg McLaughlin? If you don't, you've got to meet her." And I've said, "Yeah, I got it. I know Peg," but Peg has done a phenomenal job. So there, all of you who think you're late to the game, Peg has done a fabulous job. So kudos to Peg for kind of getting over that hump. I do see there's a note here.
Well, real quickly, we had a question that came in advance, and I think this would be the perfect point to address that question, because it can kind of transition us from casting a wide net into differentiating yourself. And so the question is, since turnover in the mutual fund board is very low and highly competitive, how can a person in a historically underrepresented class or category make it onto a mutual fund board? And so, my comment to this is, I know there are a lot of boards that are focusing on diversity and inclusion. Traditionally, back when I started, you didn't even necessarily see a lot of female board members. It was mostly men. And so I thought maybe, talking about differentiating yourself in that context would be a perfect way to transition over to step number 3.
Sure. That's obviously a big topic, right? I think particularly in the fund industry, and I can't speak generally on corporate boards, but there is an intentionality to bring more people to the interview table. That doesn't necessarily mean certain people will get the role, but I think people are being more intentional about casting that wide net. I know that I have always said to other non-gov chairs, if you're having trouble casting your wide net, I certainly am aware of many types of individuals seeking board opportunities. And to the extent I've met them and I have their resumes, I'm happy to share those going further. And we'll talk more about finding the opportunities. But don't let there be obstacles. Obviously, those of us on this panel are women. Some of us are women of color, so it can happen, and I'd like to see it happen more. But I don't think people are trying to exclude one group or another group. I know tides are shifting a little bit, but I think the objective is to get more qualified people into the interview circle and then let things go from there.
I think that's
We've certainly
absolutely
seen
true.
that we've certainly seen that in some of the inquiries we've received just over the last 5 years. More specificity about, including, different types of candidates.
Right. But I do think it still gets back to the who you know. So whoever you are, you've got to be out there, you've got to be networking, you've got to be seen. And I think, for example, just having gone through this process with our fund family, our fund group, if you're a woman and you're a Latina, it's okay to say that, because that may not be obvious by your picture or your name. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So if you are a minority, you can say that. In the board bio, a bit different from the resume, many people put a picture in there. So if you're a person of color, put that picture in there, and then that says it. But just really be there and highlighting your skills. So we did have a minority candidate, and this happened to be a gentleman, and he did not have on his resume qualified financial expert, but I could tell he was. It was completely obvious. But I said to him, "Dear God, put it on your resume and send it to me again." So if when I when the board gets back together as a group, it's obvious and it's there. So I think really for everybody, knowing your secret sauce, what do you bring to the table, and making sure that spells it out on your resume. And Cassandra, if it's okay, Cassandra and group, I'm going to take it back a step to say, we talked about let everybody know. And sometimes then they say, okay, now that I know that, send me your resume. Well, you've got to be ready with a really good resume and or board bio. And you've got to be ready. And when I say it's not just, and also in your LinkedIn profile, so all those things have got to be ready, I think, even before you're saying, okay, I want to talk about this. Now, if you're 10 years out, okay, yeah, you've got what you've got. But you've got to have those that say, here's why I'm ready for a board. It doesn't just say what you've done, but here's why I'm ready. And I would tell you, I spent 6 months chatting with people and I was not ready. I did not have good documents. I didn't have my secret sauce laid out. So I don't know, Dina and Peg, did you have that floundering period of time as well, or am I alone there?
Well, I'll speak. Yes, I have an embarrassing first story. When I decided that this is what I wanted to pursue, I actually had lunch with somebody. Long story short, they put my name, my resume, which was not a board ready resume at all.
Right.
Horrible. In with a large mutual fund complex. And to my utter surprise, the next week I got a call. I had not networked with anybody. I had not talked to anybody. I had not done anything. And I got an interview, which I spectacularly blew because I was not ready. I was answering questions as if I was looking for a job, not a board position. It was awful. But it showed me the importance of what you're saying, Michelle. Like I had to completely retool everything I had and think about, this is not, I'm not looking to be a member of management. I'm looking to be a board member. So I would agree with that.
I would also go ahead, Michelle.
So I would say the same for me. I had an interview and I actually went through even a second one. The second one was a series trust, and I could not succinctly communicate how what I've done would translate to them. And they were actually prodding me to say, so Michelle, tell me how that relates. So by the way, by the time I got to the second series trust, which is the one I'm on, I was clear. And I will tell you that I rehearsed out loud, right? Whether you can want to record yourself or whatever, and you've got to be able to be succinct about it. So if someone says, tell me about your background, they don't want to know where you went to kindergarten, right? But tell me how this relates to what you can do for us in maybe 3 minutes, maybe 4. But that being ready, Peg and you and I both said, right, as you're saying, you're just talking and you've got to be really ready. And even when you think you've got an hour for an interview, maybe 45 minutes, you've got to think about how you want to use that time and be ready. And I want to mention this as it relates to networking as well. When you're going to network with someone, be ready. So if someone introduced you, okay, now I chatted with someone recently and the woman got on the call and she really had no idea almost who I was. She hadn't looked at my LinkedIn profile, nothing. Another woman the same day, networking, she asked to meet with me. She started by saying, thank you for the gift of your time. Now, is that not well said, right? You can use it. Feel free, everyone. You can use it. But seriously, and it came from her heart, but thank you for the gift of your time. She said, similar to this, she said, I have 6 areas that I'd like to cover with you. And she listed them out, and then we went back to each one. So she knew who I was, knew my background. She was prepared. She said, thank you. She sent a thank you email afterwards.
And I would just say a couple of things. I mentioned that this is relationship building, right? At some point, I think almost everyone will take at least one call with a candidate. But the trick is, and I think this goes nicely to staying top of mind, the trick is to build a relationship so you have more than one call, right? And what are you giving that other person on the other side of the Zoom, on the other side of the phone, in exchange for their time, right? So this is not just a one-way street where you're going in and asking for advice. You need to offer something to them, whether it's introductions, whether it's ideas, whether it's connections or recommendations, suggestions, anything. But it's got to be a two-way street, and I think you've got to move past one and done. And that's kind of our next topic. So for those of you staying tuned, number 4 is staying top of mind, right? If you just meet somebody once, they may not remember you, and they're meeting a lot of other people. So you've got to stay in front of them. And to me, this is a challenging part because I'm not somebody who wants to toot their own horn. And if you're just calling somebody once a month, it feels like you're just saying, look at me, don't forget about me, here I am. So it's in the vein of relationship building. How do you stay in front of them without just this big billboard saying, I'm looking for a board spot, don't forget about me, here's my updated bio again. And Peg and Michelle, I'm interested to see how you guys kind of approach that so that you did build these relationships over time and you stayed in front of people on a regular basis, but without sort of that sales and marketing pitch constantly.
Well, I can take that.
You go first.
A few things on that, I would say. One is you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. It's not just a one-way street. It's not, could you give me this information and okay, thank you, I'm going to call you in a few months, or and ask you something like that. I think that goes to where trying to learn more about the person personally, as opposed to just, on a professional basis. What can you do for the person that's giving you, as Michelle said, the gift of your time? So I really, in some ways it was so hard during the pandemic because you couldn't have one-to-one coffees with people in town and you had to rely on Zoom. But in another sense, that really gave you a way to sort of, humanize each other. I always ask people how are they managing? And either if I was on Zoom or on the phone, how that was affecting them and their family, and, I'm hoping that everyone was okay. But the point was I got to know them on just not a purely, this is your professional role. So I always looked for ways, and not necessarily just professionally, to help somebody else. I just felt like it's the right thing to do, right? And then I think the other thing that you mentioned, Dina, in terms of, how do you stay top of mind? I think the once a month thing, there are people that will reach out to me that often. I think that's probably not the way to do it. I think, every 3 to 6 months is probably the right amount. But one of the things that I did was I wrote articles on issues that I thought were important in the boardroom, something that might be coming up where, the board might not have necessarily an expertise in that area, but they need to be aware of it and they need to be able to have questions about it. And so I wrote a couple articles where I, because of my background in technology, cybersecurity was very interesting to me. So I wrote a couple articles where I gave questions ultimately that board members could use. And so that gave me a touch point to go back, after doing them, to the people that I'd spoke to and said, hey, I just did this article. I think this would be helpful. Do you have 10 or 15 minutes to catch up? And I think people were amenable to that.
I think, Peg, that is just an excellent example, because not only are you staying in front of people, and you're staying in front of them with something you've written, not just an article you read, on the internet, but you've also now positioned yourself as, if I were sitting at a board table, here's the types of questions I think a board should be asking about cybersecurity. And so you're really now connecting the dots for your audience as to how you're showing up at the board table. And our 5th topic is really about establishing yourself as the perfect fit. It's Michelle talked earlier about having these sort of corporate resumes, right? Of this laundry list of your experiences and your jobs, and it's in chronological order, and it's 3 and 4 pages. What NomGov chairs are looking for is how do you show up at the board table? And the easier you make it for that chair to see how you're going to show up at the board table, the less work they have to do. And if they have to go through 4 pages and say, oh, this person was a fund accountant 20 years ago, and if I connect all the dots, I can see how they show up. Or if you can translate it in your opening part of your bio about how you've leveraged your experience and here's how you show up at the board table. That to me is establishing how you're a perfect fit. And Peg's articles, I think, is a perfect segue of saying, here's how she shows up at the board table. Here's the types of questions a board member should ask. And my bet is anyone who read her articles learned something, and also learned something about Peg in the same vein.
And I would just say, for those of us that may not feel as comfortable writing articles, I think that same thought of just connecting with people as people. Where do they live? Where are they traveling to? I mean, obviously not during COVID, but what are they doing personally? And I think some good advice that I had was ending every call with someone, call, Zoom, whatever, contact with, is there anything I can do for you? So I think really establishing that two-way street and that back and forth. I'll kind of go back to my spreadsheet, and some advice there would be to look at your spreadsheet every month. It does not mean you contact everyone, but just look at it and say, or maybe you put a note like, oh, Michelle's going to Iceland. And maybe you saw an article about Iceland. That's a way to connect on a personal level as well. Or Michelle lives in Sedona. I'm going to be in Scottsdale. Maybe she could give me some advice on that, for example. So I think you can connect with people in various ways, both on that very professional level or on a relationship as well. And then to just take a look and say, really for each person, what's the right amount of time to reconnect? And I really struggled with that. And I don't know if other people did too, but how often? I have people that I'm close to, some on this call, that they're fine calling me every month, or I might email them and say, how are you doing? Do you need a pep talk? Right? If you're in the process. So I think to also establish that core group of people that maybe will be in your background, cheering you on and helping you. And then some people who maybe you contact every 3 months, or like, as we've talked about conferences here, there's a conference coming up. You might email them and say, are you going to that conference, for example? So, and I'm just looking at the topic that we're on, establishing the perfect fit. But I do think it's really that keeping yourself top of mind. And a LinkedIn comment that I'll share, that attending a number of webinars on LinkedIn and how you do that, is one expert just said, just spend 9 minutes, just go into your feed and see what other people are doing and comment on that, or like it, or congratulate them, or whatever it is. But you're being seen out there as well. So go with what you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable writing articles, do that. Connect on a personal level, but be on LinkedIn, be visible. Let people know that you are out there. And I can tell you that we all get busy, but this week's been busy. So maybe I haven't done my 9 minutes a day, but I can tell you, one of my board members, if we know people in common, he has already commented on that person's post. So he is out there as well. So just be visible. And I'm going to make one more conference comment, as people may be planning to go to conferences, is once you register, you get the attendee list. Look at that list and say, who do I want to meet? Contact them in advance and say, can we have a few minutes to talk? Or at what point during the day could we arrange to meet? So they know you. Again, you're trying to get them to know you on a bit of a personal level, not just the name.
But a lot of those conferences have apps now where it makes it very easy to
Yes.
schedule meetings. The other thing I wanted to jump in and applaud the three of you for, and thank you, is you have all demonstrated a dedication to helping other women achieve their goals and helping other women get that seat at the board table. Everyone involved in this series has. And so from the minute Dina and I started talking about this 3-part series, she was gracious enough to introduce me to some of the phenomenal women that she knows. And it's really been very helpful. So even just doing this webinar, I think you're doing a lot for the community at large.
Thank you. And I actually, that touches on a point I wanted to raise as we're casting the wide net. Befriending and networking with other people who are also looking for board roles is critical. Peg and I met at the IDC, the Independent Directors Council Conference in October of 2019. And, people are so quick to introduce you to other people searching for board roles. And, your first reaction might be, okay, there's a lot of people searching. I want to meet the people at the table. But I have to say, my army got so much stronger meeting and surrounding myself with other people who are looking for board roles. Please don't count those out. Peg is a phenomenal example of, she saw an article where a board was saying, we're looking for candidates. And she called me and said, I'm going to cold call and apply. You ought to do the same. And we both cold called. We both applied. We both got interviews, and Peg actually got the role, which was, phenomenal. But she didn't feel that I was in competition with her, that, we have different backgrounds, we have different skill sets. So as you're casting your wide net, make sure you include people who are on the journey with you, because they may end up being your closest friends. And when you all join boards, which you will, you'll already have a support group to work you through onboarding and next steps.
I agree with that. And I also want to say that for all of us on this call, and I know this is true, we are not just here to help women. We are helping the men too, right? Mm-hmm. And so one gentleman who may be on the call, he had a resume that just wasn't very good. And I knew him well enough that I could say, this is horrible. Go back and redo it. And he asked me for mine, and I sent it to him, and he copied, not the words, of course, but the visual format exactly the same. I opened it up and went, oh my God, is that my resume? So it was the greatest compliment, right? Before we even move forward, there's one thing we didn't touch on, and I think it's something that I give this advice to everyone I chat with, is you really have to think about how much money you'll spend in this process. So if you're still working and your company's, paying for you to go to conferences, fabulous. And you can do that networking on, pardon me, but someone else's dime. That's great. But once you're on your own and you're doing this networking, and Peg, as you said, maybe going to coffee, and that's fine. But, I'm here in small town Arizona. Zoom was my friend, right? And that worked for me. But once you make that commitment, whether it's to join an organization, and most of the organizations are, private directors at $450, but going up from there annually, and it's an annual commitment. Everything's expensive. You go to a conference, and I'd estimate, $3,000 between, if you're flying by air, you're staying in a hotel, and so on, the conference itself per conference. So you really, if this were like November of last year, I'd say to someone, okay, now as you're doing your budget for 2024, you want to think about what's your investment. I would also tell you that I could not adequately talk about my skills myself well. So I hired a resume writer who helped me with my resume, my board bio. And then I went back to her 6 months later and said, oh yeah, that pesky LinkedIn, can you help me with that? So my advice is get it all done together and make it look incredible. And I would say the competition out there is intense. And Dina and Peg, would you agree that people who are coming in with well done documents as compared to not well done, unless someone's really, really exceptional and you can pull out the skills yourself, the documents do make a difference today. Because like Peg, when you're getting a bunch of resumes and you're flipping through, and I don't mean to minimize it, you're looking, but if they're well done, it's a different ballgame.
Right. And I would agree with that. And I think I was going to make the point, and kind of going back to what Dina had talked about, with not having to go through that resume and pick out yourself, like what the skill sets are. And I find, and I'll open it up to the people that are here too. I'm happy to talk to anyone. People have been incredibly kind to me, and I have always felt like I am all about paying it forward. So I will put that out, connecting with me on LinkedIn. I'll talk to anybody. But some of the things that I've seen when I've been talking to people over the last few years has been that when you talk to them, they explain, they may have this, their title may be one thing, but when you peel back the onion, you see that they've got a bunch of varied experiences that, had I not had this conversation, I wouldn't have known from their resume. So I think that's one of the things that, and again, going back to Dina, you put it so well, differentiating yourself, trying to find how you are unique. I'm a lawyer. I've always had legal titles, but my last 2 jobs with the startup, I did a lot on operations and strategy, a whole bunch of other things. And, people said when I started, nobody wants, as in all walks of life, nobody wants another lawyer in the room. So I felt like I had to really think about what I brought. And I did bring some unique things, and I always pushed that out. And so I would suggest that people really think about, I mean, I've had so many people talk about, well, I did this, and it wasn't anywhere in their resume. And it was a great, Michelle, going back to what you're saying, it was a skill set that you could absolutely transfer into a boardroom situation. You don't have to be an expert in something, but if you know how things work, you're able to ask the questions. You're not management anymore, you're oversight. So having an understanding of a lot of different things is very helpful to a board, and you need to be able to say that in your resume and upfront. And
I think by adding on to that, coupled with your elevator pitch, you need to narrow it down to probably the 3 key skills and experiences that you have. Because if you have a dozen, we go back to the issue of, how are you differentiating yourself? How are you staying memorable and top of mind? If I can't remember all 12 of those items, I'm most likely to forget all of them. So you've got to figure out a way to sort of boil down the ocean. All of us have had 30 some years of careers, and you've got to figure out, tailor your conversations, your elevator pitch to your audience. So if you're talking to somebody, with an ESG lens, or you're talking to somebody with an IT lens, tailor those talking points to what really resonates with them and what shows that you will make a difference on their board. And I know, Cassandra, we're running out of time,
yes.
and everyone really tuned in for, how do I find the opportunities? And
so real quickly, do you mind if I jump in with this question? The question was, is there a resume format, a bullet point or narrative that is best received by boards looking for new members? And I think I'd like you all to address that, but I think it was brought up earlier. You should really have a resume and a board bio. So perhaps that bullet point is more the board bio document.
Yeah, I have both. And we did have a couple of candidates that really only had a board bio. And in both cases, I went back to them and said, do you have a resume? And one did not. And that was, okay. And we could look at the LinkedIn to see the background of the other candidate. I tend to agree with Cassandra. I will tell you though, like in the mutual fund form database, you can only put in one document. So you have to choose.
Yes, we hadn't mentioned yet. You can add your documents to mutual ICI or IDC or MFDF, right?
Right.
Both have databases.
Right, but I think you can only do one. You've got to choose. You can't, even if you put them all together. I don't think so. I don't know. And you could ask that question. I do agree with that, though, that you need to have both, and they should be clear. And I think if you have a degree, or I have Michelle Racky MBA, and I would tell you that's only because I saw a job poster where they wanted an MBA, so I added that there. But if you're a CFA or something, it doesn't hurt to have that after your name. In this process, I was guiding some new folks along saying, you know, way at the bottom of your resume, it said CFA. Have you thought about moving that up on top? I wanted to comment, and I know we'll leave soon. I'm happy to chat with anyone as well. I'm on my phone, so I don't have access to put it in the chat. Michelle Racky, 1L@gmail.com.
I think, Cassandra, if you can just share our LinkedIn profiles in the
Yeah.
FAQs, then people
Absolutely.
can reach out.
Cassandra,
that
I
would
wanted
be
to
great.
just, oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get back to you, what, like the question that was done, is it better to have one or the other? And I would say, and Michelle's right, that for the Mutual Fund Directors Forum, and for those of you that don't know what that is, that's another trade organization similar to the IDC that is solely for mutual fund directors. They have a database that you can put your bio or your resume in. I would say, in some ways, I think I put my resume on in that. And the reason is because my resume had more, I used more of a bullet point. I had parts narrative. I have my resume will say right up front my board competencies. And I think that is an easier way. Obviously, people use an algorithm. They use for keywords. And I think that using it where you have bullets, where you can include more keywords that might get picked up in the algorithm, I think that's better. I also wanted to point out the IDC also has just as of the last year or so, I think, has a list as well. That's done in conjunction with the Toigo Foundation, which part of their mission is is diversity. And so getting back to that, you know, a question that came along a little earlier, how can diverse candidates get on to the radars? That's another option. But I think, you know, just making sure that you've got some of the keywords that people are going to search for is important.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of bullet points because, again, are you connecting the dots for the reader, right? If there are just paragraph after paragraph of text, I'm likely not going to read it, right? So how can I succinctly get to the meat of who you are? Again, 30 years of your career in bullet points is tough. And some of you on the call have already received this feedback. Don't have, you know, 20,000 words in each bullet point, because that sort of defeats the purpose of a bullet point. But to the extent you are thinking about who's reading this, what do they need to know about how I show up at the board table, that's the information you need to send over. And we only have 5 minutes, and everyone has been dying to know, how do you find the opportunities? It is challenging. I really think some of the best ways to do it is the networking, right? The talking to people, whether it's one-on-one through Zoom or phone calls or in person, whether it's at conferences, and there's been a lot in the chat about conferences. Cassandra's going to send some information out. But again, we've talked about several industry events sponsored by Investment Company Institute and their affiliate Independent Directors Council, as well as Mutual Fund Directors Forum. There are a lot of conferences. It takes some internal courage to show up at a conference knowing that you are not yet a director and you are going to a conference that's focused on educating current directors. But I can tell you I've done it, and you can get through it and you can make great relationships, but it takes some internal strength and fortitude to do it, some humility. And there are recruiters. I did get an interview through a recruiting firm, so I wouldn't, close that off. It's a little bit of a painful process, but you can go through recruiting firms as well. But a lot of it is word of mouth. Somebody ends up having a search. They talk to their lawyers, who are trusted advisors. They talk to their auditors, who are also trusted advisors. They may talk to their friends. So I'll let Peg and Michelle jump in the few minutes we have left.
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly, the lawyers and the accountants. And if you don't know trustee counsel or fund counsel, you probably know some lawyer at a firm. Think of your network and
Right.
get the lawyers that you know to connect you to the lawyers at their firm that are part of that practice. I've had several opportunities come my way through lawyers. Same with auditors. If somebody is working at one of the big four or big five, if you don't know someone in particular in that practice group, find your friends and neighbors that are accountants and get them to connect you to somebody in that practice group.
That's right. So I had, just as an example, an auditor in my former neighborhood in Baltimore. We were both moving at the same time. I told him what I wanted to do. He connected me with so many people at his firm, some very high-level women and men. They all took the time to talk with me. And I'm going to say 6 or 8 people within this organization. And a year and a half later, after chatting with one of them, mid last year, I got a call from them saying, or an email saying, I've got a client who's looking for a board member. Would you be interested? And by the way, first he looked at my LinkedIn profile to see what had transpired. He said, I see you're on a board now, but blah, are you interested? And so really use every connection, the neighborhood barbecue grill, whatever it is. I did not take a soft approach to this, right or wrong, I did not. I even went on LinkedIn, found people who were mutual fund board members and said, you're on a board. I would be a great board member. I would love to talk about your path. And I would tell you, doing that, I found 2 openings, 2. Wow. So I say, do not be shy, people. You have to leave that shyness, just put it in the closet and leave it there. I really believe you cannot be shy in this process. And ladies in the panel, do you agree with that? You just can't be sitting here waiting for the phone to ring.
I would agree. I treated this as a full-time job. I mean, I had some people tell me, try to talk to 1 or 2 people a week. And I did not take that advice. And I really, every day I did something. I tried to do something to push myself forward to do that. And I also agree. It's not just, you never know where these opportunities are going to come. I had a friend that I was walking my dog and she knew that we had sold our companies and she asked me what I was doing and she had no involvement in asset management. And I told her that I was looking for this and she's like, I think my cousin has something to do with that. Long story short, he connected me. I got connected to her cousin who connected me to somebody who connected me to somebody who connected me to somebody who got me an interview at a thing. So you just never know.
Right. So I say you leave no stone unturned, truly, nothing. And, like the handyman walks in the door. Hey, did you know I'm looking for a mutual fund board? Really? I mean, nothing. And, even though Peg and I are both extroverts, and I would say Dina is too, I think I took it to the next level. And I agree with Peg that I worked really hard. I felt a bit like my clock was ticking, whether I was right or wrong. And I also felt by the end of 2022, I almost did not know if I could keep up that pace of networking and webinars and things. I just didn't know if I could have the fortitude to do that.
Before Cassandra cuts us off altogether, I would just say also allow yourself some grace, right? This is a journey. This doesn't, for me personally, Peg and I were just talking about this. This took years. I'm hoping that those of you online, it won't take as long as it took me, but it's a roller coaster ride. You'll have small victories, you'll have some bruises, and while it is a full-time job, also if you're retired, you have an entire self portfolio and you want to invest in yourself, and it's part of who you are, but it shouldn't be the only thing about yourself. So allow yourself some grace to try and enjoy the process, try and enjoy the people you're meeting, the friends that you're making, the character building that comes along with this. And hopefully we've engaged you enough that you'll tune in April for our next one. But Cassandra, back to you.
Right. Thank you. So as Dina just mentioned, the final coffee chat in this series for registered fund boards will take place on April 10th. We will be getting those invitations out relatively soon, so keep an eye out for those. You will all receive one. In the meantime, before that, actually on March 13th, we are doing another coffee chat on revolutionizing legal practice, shaping the future of law through tech innovation. We're going to talk about things that we're doing at this firm. So, and if you missed the first part of this series, or you want to look at any other coffee chats, we encourage you to look at our library recordings, which are available on Thompson Hine's YouTube channel. I want to really thank the three of you for presenting today, and I want to thank everyone who did attend. A special thank you to all of you. I think these presenters are sharing invaluable insight. When the webinar does end, which I promise will be in just a moment, you will be prompted to take a survey, and we welcome your feedback. I wish everyone a happy and prosperous year ahead, and have a great week.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. We're happy to take a call and pay it forward.
We will
Absolutely.
circulate all of that in the, we have some FAQs we put together. We'll address maybe one or two other questions we didn't get to, and send that out to all the attendees. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Cassandra.
Thanks
Thank you
to
all. Good
Thompson
to see you
Hine.
all. Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.